Nilanjan, we are live now. You can go ahead.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's celebration of the 10th and the very special edition of Prabandhan'. As MBA students, we constantly strive to inculcate the culture of peer-to-peer learning, and a platform like Prabandhan' multiplies the possibility of such sustained engagement. Building on the success of last year, the first online edition of Prabandhan', we are yet again geared up to scale new heights and put forth another engaging 3-day business extravaganza. To give this celebration a lightning start, we have the privilege to host Professor Abhay Karandikar, the Director of IIT Kanpur, Mr. Ashish Sethia, Global Head of Commodities at BloombergNEF, and Mr. Abhishek Srivastava, co-founder at Recruin. Finally, the event cannot start without the special mention of the exceptional support and guidance provided by Professor BV, our Head of Department at IME, and Professor Jothsna Rajan, Faculty In-charge, Prabandhan'. Now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would invite our Honourable Director, Professor Karandikar, to share a few words at this occasion. Sir, the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, on behalf of IIT Kanpur, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all the participants today. Our distinguished speakers, Ashish Sethia and Abhishek Srivastava. Ashish is our own alumnus, so welcome back to the Institute. And I would also like to extend my warm welcome to all the students who are participating. It is rather unfortunate that because of the COVID pandemic, we are meeting online, but I hope that 2022 we will be meeting in person on the campus, and I look forward to meeting with you all. As was mentioned by Nilanjan, that Prabandhan' is celebrating the 10th anniversary. So it has achieved a historic milestone of 10 years. And we really have a lot to look backwards and also plan for the future. Institute itself is at an important cusp in the sense that we have achieved a tremendous growth in the last decade or so. And particularly now we are transforming ourselves into a vibrant, large, multidisciplinary institutions. As you know, historically, IIT Kanpur started as a engineering and technology institute. But over the years, I'm very delighted to share with you that our sciences departments have really grown into one of the best science departments in the country. And in the last 2 decades or so, our emphasis on humanities, social sciences, management, entrepreneurships is really transforming the institute into a multidisciplinary institutions. And in fact, we are now looking forward to even start a medical school, which will really bring in the aspect of cutting edge research at the intersection of engineering, social sciences, management, and life sciences and medicine, which is, as you know, has been amply demonstrated during this pandemic, that a multidisciplinary approach is really the only approach to solve a global health problem of this magnitude. You cannot solve it alone by doctors, you cannot solve it alone by policymakers and managers, and you cannot alone solve it by scientists and engineers. We really need a multidisciplinary approach, and I think the Institute is now transforming to sort of that thing. I am very delighted to see that the Department of Industrial and Management Engineering itself has been really transforming. We have recently hired several new faculty members. In fact, Jothsna happens to be one of them. And we are now emphasizing more and more on hiring and growing faculty members in this area. The Institute recently also has approved a very flexible and one of its kind a students entrepreneurship policy, which actually envisages giving a minor in entrepreneurship. And I believe, and I have been telling the department of IME that the department can really take a lead in starting a minor in entrepreneurship program and going forwards, even a formal degree we can think of. The other areas, where there is a big opportunity for the technology management schools in the technology institutions to really focus on public policy matters also. Today, the issues of energy, environment, water, climate, telecommunications, digital connectivity, health, they all happen at the intersections of public policy management and technology. And I think IIT Kanpur is really the right background for doing this. So these are exciting times really, and I hope that students of the departments will be able to exploit the unique opportunity that IIT Kanpur offers, being a premier science and engineering institutions to students of management, which actually no other management school offers in the country except the management schools in our sister IITs. And I think I would say that both faculty and students of this should strive to exploit that opportunity. So I wish the Prabandhan a great success. I would like to formally declare this event open. And I'm sure the next 2 days we will have a lot of collaborations and interactions amongst yourself and with industry leaders, and take insights from them that what we can do not only for our personal and professional careers, but also for the institutional and departmental growth as well. So once again, thank you very much. We have an exciting line of speakers, including the speakers today in the inaugural ceremony. So I would like to extend once again my warm welcome to Mr. Ashish Sethia and Mr. Abhishek Srivastava. And I'm sure you will get benefited by their wisdom and thought. So thank you once again for inviting me on this, and look forward to these interactions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words and kicking off this event on this high note. I would now move on and request our esteemed Head of Department, Professor Phani, to share his vision on the MBA program and Prabandhan. Professor Phani, the stage is all yours.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I had some kind of a technological issue. I am getting logged into Zoom. Somehow it took me 10 minutes, which is normally immediately. But anyway, here we are, and I did not miss our director's address in this, and it was really inspiring. And I also know, because we work pretty closely with the institute and the director in this sense in many of these activities. And the innovation ecosystem which we have fostered on campus is also very huge, and we have about 100 startups and about 70 graduated, and now we are coming up with a hospital. So for us at the management school, it's very, very exciting. And let me at the outset welcome Ashish and Abhishek for being here, taking time out, and I hope they'll have time to interact with some of the faculty members at some point in time, even either after the event or today, tomorrow. I think we can arrange something so that they can share their views, and the department can take this thing from them. And the department, of course, has been doing quite a lot, including changing the curriculum, changing the way it functions, the way it looks at the overall, how it can fit into the overall ecosystem at IIT Kanpur. And that way we have modified most of our course curriculum also to fit into, to leverage the technological strength, basically, because most of our students are also from the engineering stream. I don't think we allow anybody, student from other streams other than sciences and engineering. So that way we are in the right position to take advantage of whatever is being done, leverage the ecosystem to the best, coming up with technological managers rather than pure managers, kind of a. So we have built a niche for ourselves. Of course, we are ranked 16th, and I think we are among the management institutes, and we are ranked 5th among the IITs, I believe, in the management schools. And we are trying to overcome this and try to come up with. We are also thinking of changing the name, which I think the faculty recently agreed to. Instead of Industrial Management Engineering, maybe Department of Management Sciences and Industrial Engineering. So hopefully that should give us a little bit more visibility from the branding wise and outreach wise. We have really shaped up in the last 3 years, but we have almost 2 seminars or webisodes almost every week, and depending on the different domains. And these are our extra what do you call ways of learning or exposing our students to the industry. And in recently also under this thing of Professor Karandikar, the IIT has launched its e-masters programs, and this department took advantage when got the approval for the e-masters program, and this department took full advantage of that fact. And I think we are the only department to launch 2 new e-masters courses, and one is close to Ashish's heart. So it is on derivatives and risk management with specific emphasis on commodity derivatives. So we hope to leverage your knowledge in that domain and try to see how we can involve you, at least, if not, I mean, at least as a guide, or maybe taking some set of lectures for us. So that is one thing which we are looking forward to. And the human resources component, I hope Abhishek Srivastava also joins us in this at some point. Of course, we are mostly focusing on Ashish because he is our alumni and MBA alumni at that from 2004. So he is more like family. And another significant thing, which I think this is a decade of Prabandhan', but it is also 2 decades of MBA program at IIT Kanpur. So we will be most probably be launching a celebratory event from next year onwards, culminating in the 50th year of the department in about 2 years from now. So we want to host a series of exciting events along with the students and the faculty and the alumni and also the ex-faculty and the industry together to get exposed and celebrate this milestone for the department. And thank you very much for being here. And I would like to specifically thank the director for being here, because I know how busy he is, and 9 to 9:30 is his time where he doesn't allow even for a single meeting. It's his time, and somehow we encroached on that and imposed on him, and somehow he's here. And thank you very much, sir. Thank you all. And Nilanjan, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, sir. Moving on, a management fest is half-baked without the support from its industry partners. On this note, I would now like to welcome Mr. Abhishek Srivastava, co-founder at Recruin, the event partner for Prabandhan'21, to share his experience as an entrepreneur and his thoughts on Prabandhan'. Sir, kindly take the center stage. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Nilanjan. And first of all, thank you, Abhay sir and Phani sir, for basically giving the very good motivational thought, and which is really going good in industry. Our association is with IIT Kanpur. Typically, this MBA program is from last 5 years. So we already have the people from starting from 2018 pass out batch till 2022 pass out batch is about to pass out, have in the organization. So that's good. And few of them have even reached to a certain leadership level position. So definitely we can thank the kind of quality of education and the kind of entrepreneur IIT Kanpur is producing. So that's about it. About the journey, about the overall thing, because majorly people who will be listening to us are students, and as of now they are little bit, some people are predictable, some people are unpredictable about their career, what kind of jobs they're getting, how they'll be reaching to certain stage. So that's the one of the important thing which they need to focus on, the skilling, which is basically done by the institute. But from the outer world, what they need to achieve, okay, definitely they need to prepare themselves from the point of a different aspect, from the scalability, from the scalability, also from the, I can say, from the mental wellness point of view also, mental and physical wellness, well-being point of view also. So they need to work on those things. They don't need to demotivate on such smaller failures, all those things. So we believe on one thing, because Recruin is one of the HR tech company, but prior to that, I was involved. I was also sitting in a board of few of the companies, few of the startup in their HR board, and where we come across one particular thing, idea never fails. Okay, typically people fail. So somebody come up with the same idea, different people, they get that idea succeeded. Okay, so what happens to the new generation when we talk about, they want something very fast, but sometime we need some kind of patience, perseverance, and a hard work, smart work kind of thing to pursue that thing. So that's the very important aspect of the life and their career journey, because these first 1 to 5 years are very crucial in your journey, in your career journey. What you are thinking for yourself, what kind of career you want to adopt. Are you only fascinating about the high CTC or very big brand, or you want to work with any of the company which is currently a startup but can be a future unicorn? Okay, so these are the one of the important aspect, and I would like to thank you. Even when we are a 20 people company, IIT Kanpur have hosted in our campus, and we bring 2 of the talents from IIT Kanpur, and one became the CEO in typically 3 years, one of the product company. So he might be coming to your next of the event, Rishabh Gupta, who's 2019 batch and currently heading a blockchain product called Mass DeFi. Okay, and fewer leading other operation, other things. So definitely that's the important thing. That's the longevity. That's the vision he has seen in the organization, all these things. So don't be disheartened for the things. Make your career goals very clear. Don't be demotivated. Make short-term plan, long-term plan. Okay, and also how you achieve that. Speak with industry leader. You guys have a phenomenal, I can say, set of alumni. Okay, so you can connect with them, get the guidance with them, where you want to reach. Okay, so these are the important thing you guys need to understand. And I would like to also mention, every year we basically hire few set of interns. Okay, and typically most of these intern get converted into a full-time employee. So typically in 2 months, the kind of input they given in the company, what kind of dedication they are coming from, definitely it is being given by the institution, what I feel, because whatever they have typically taught in typically 1 year or 1.5 years time during the institution, they get those kind of motivation. So best of luck for all of the people who are in first year, second year, going for the campus recruitment program for your future. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for these kind words. I'm sure this will help students while they prepare for their journey beyond campus. Finally, moving on to the highlight of the day, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome our distinguished alumnus, Mr. Ashish Sethia, Global Head of Commodities at BloombergNEF. Mr. Ashish has had a decade and a half of experience in creating and leading multiple services and product businesses in the sectors of energy, commodities, renewables, and utility. Prior to joining Bloomberg, he worked at business consulting and technology firms where he led capital budgeting and business process reengineering projects in the energy sector globally. Based out of Houston, he leads a group of experts globally working on net zero emission pathways to counter the climate change. Through the years, Mr. Ashish has spoken at leading forums such as the World Future Energy Summit, the World Energy Leaders Summit, and at the Clean Energy Ministry. He has hosted dialogues with G20 ministers and given inputs to the works of the World Economic Forum as well as the World Energy Council. On these lines, I would now welcome Ashish sir to take the center stage and share his thoughts on the topic, the business of climate change. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nilanjan. And let me also thank Vaibhav and the Prabandhan team for inviting me here today. I also want to thank Dr. Karandikar, Dr. Phani, Dr. Rajan, and Abhishek for being here a bit early to accommodate my schedule in the evening here in Houston. What I wanted to do in the next 40 odd minutes or so was explain to you the urgency of one of the most pressing issues that humanity faces. And I'm not talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, which I hope is a transient phase in all our lives, right? But essentially, one of the critical challenges I think that the humanity faces today is climate change. So I talk a bit about how we got here. I would then want to talk a little bit about how much progress have we made in fighting against climate change, and then try and explain to you our views or my team's view around how how can we move forward in terms of using cost competitive technologies of today and cost competitive technologies in next 20, 30 years to take this fight forward. But then we'll probably end by looking at whether these cost competitive technology solutions will be enough to get us where the world needs to reach in the fight against climate change, or we need to pull some more levers, right? So that's kind of the agenda for my presentation today. But let me first start by essentially what the challenge is. So first things first, 2020 was a record year in terms of warming of the planet, the hottest year on record in Europe, the hottest year on record for the world. And the previous record was set in 2016, and the previous record in Europe, if you are trying to take a guess, I think you'll guess it right, was actually not that long ago. It was just in 2019. So we are getting into a phase where consecutive years are setting record in terms of being the warmest years in the world, right? And you can see on the map here that essentially, if you look at 2020, the temperatures in 2020 around the world, the deviation from the averages in the 30-year period of 1980 to 2010 is almost 1 to 2 degree centigrades in many parts of the world. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but it is actually a lot of a significant temperature difference and causes a significant amount of problems around the world. One of which is, this is a recent image from this year, from the fires in Italy and Greece, right? People losing their homes, their livelihoods. These fires have been unheard of in decades and decades altogether, but are becoming more recurrent, are becoming more widespread. So that's one of the challenges. But global warming doesn't only cause fires, right? It causes other kinds of challenges as well. This is a picture from where I live in Houston, in Texas. And early this year, we had significant amount of snowstorms and something called the big freeze, which is again unheard of in a city like Houston because it's a pretty temperate city next to the Gulf of Mexico. And this is an image again from this year itself in Germany, in Cologne, in Germany, where there was so much flooding that literally houses and localities caved in and people died, right? So you not only have fires, you have snow in places where you don't expect it to, you have flooding in places where you don't really expect it to happen, right? So this is all kind of starting to add up in different shapes and forms. What's the reason behind all of this? That's essentially an increase in the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases or CO2, right? Now, before the Industrial Revolution, we were always staying below 300 parts per million, which is a significant threshold in some sense to keep global warming and climate change in check. Since then, emissions and CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has gone up unabated, literally unabated. The pandemic has helped a little bit for a small period of time, but we are starting to rise up again. And remember the fact that this doesn't happen overnight. The curve you are seeing here is built not over decades, not over hundreds of years. This is built over tens and thousands and millions of years, right? So even if humanity decides today to completely forego all the emissions that it causes, right? And a large part of that comes from certain sectors I'll talk about today. We literally drop to zero today. That will take not decades, not a few hundred years. That might take thousands and thousands of years to reverse this concentration of CO2 emissions. So we are already past 400 parts per million. Scientists essentially try and achieve something around 350, 400 parts per million. We are kind of already beyond those tolerance levels. So we'll have to live with the reality that certain changes that humanity has caused because of emissions are irreversible, but scientists still say that there is a bit of hope if we can limit the temperature rise to around 1.5 degrees Celsius, right, compared to the industrial level. So I'll try and explain how we can get there. Now, what causes emissions? Essentially, the production and the use of energy in different sectors of the economy. Power sector, electricity is a huge proportion of that. We still use a lot of coal and natural gas to produce electricity. Transport sector, the cars, the two-wheelers, the trucks and buses, they use a lot of petrol, gasoline, diesel, and that causes emissions. Not only their combustion in the vehicle itself, but right from the production of those fuels to their transport and then eventually combustion in the vehicle, all of that has associated emissions. You have emissions in industrial processes, whether you make cement, you make steel, you make aluminum, all of those things consume energy and cause emissions as well. And then you have sectors like aviation and shipping, which also cause significant amount of emissions. So just the production and consumption of energy across all these sectors is roughly responsible for 70% of annual emissions around the world, right? So that's the problem. Now, my team at BloombergNEF for last 15, 16 years has tried to figure out how various end-use sectors can decarbonize. What are the pathways? Can we do a bit more solar and wind and power sector? Can we do electric vehicles in the transport sector? Can we use industrial IoT solutions in industries like steel manufacturing, in cement production? Can we use certain sustainable materials? We're looking at all of those kinds of options, but we're not only looking at technology. We're also looking at policy intervention that is required, and we're looking at essentially the capabilities of the financial markets to fund this technology overhaul across all the sectors of the global economy. So if you only try and fix the problem in the power sector, you'll not get there. If you only try and fix the problem in the transport sector, you'll not get there. If US tries to fix that problem, we'll not get there. If China tries to fix that problem, we'll not get there. This has to be a humanity-wide effort, right? Nobody can escape this responsibility of trying to reduce their emissions today, given where we already are in terms of the climate crisis. So let me talk a little bit about the progress we have made, because we know what the problem is now, but what are the options that we have already tried to scale up? So the good news is in the power sector, you have technologies like solar, which have become quite cheap. I think if some of you were born in the 1980s as I was, you would only see solar panels perhaps in Star Wars movies, right? And satellites and stuff. But today you probably see solar panels in various places, even in IIT Kanpur, I'm hoping, because the technology has gotten cheaper. The curve here essentially shows you that for every doubling of capacity in the solar industry, costs are coming down by around 29%. So that's great news. And by and large, yes, you have supply chain problems in certain years, and in certain years you have cost which deviate from this experience curve. But by and large, in a long period of time, you essentially are looking at a 29% cost reduction in the technology for every doubling of capacity in the industry. Now, what that is doing is, in the last decade or so, there has been a fourfold rise in installation of solar capacity around the world, particularly in the power sector and solar power generation. And I'm sure some of you at least have read in the press that in India, you can generate solar power now at 2 or 3 rupees per kilowatt hour, which is much more competitive compared to building a new coal power project or new gas power project to generate the same electricity. So solar industry is definitely, been one of the key success stories in the fight against climate change, perhaps. You also have another technology in the power sector, which is wind power, where again, the cost of wind turbines has gone down by almost 40% in the last decade or so. Now, it is also important to remember that while the costs for wind turbines have come down, they've also become much more efficient. So, you can now install wind turbines in places around the world where wind speeds are pretty low. They don't basically go back that much. You have various preventive maintenance techniques and stuff. So, turbines are getting better at that. And the hub heights of the turbines and the kind of diameter of the blades of the turbines are increasing as well. So essentially, the overall efficiency of the turbine is increasing. So the costs are going down, but because the efficiency is also increasing at the same time, the cost of power generation from wind power has gone down significantly over the last decade or so. And in fact, 2020 was a record year in terms of installing wind turbines around the world for clean power generation. So that's another good news. Overall, you are now in a situation where wind and solar power is quite competitive in the power sector compared to fossil fuels like coal and natural gas in most parts of the world. In fact, according to our estimates, almost 2/3 of the global population now lives in countries where solar or wind power generation is the cheapest form of new energy or new power production. So again, that's pretty phenomenal news in terms of where we are in terms of making progress in the power sector, at least for decarbonization. There's another very important enabling technology that needs to scale up significantly, where costs are also, again, coming down quite significantly. And that's essentially lithium-ion batteries. Now, lithium-ion batteries basically can be used in the power sector when the sun is not shining, when the wind is not blowing. You can essentially use these batteries to provide dispatchable power to the electricity grids. So they make technologies like solar and wind much more usable in the power system, because you and I use electricity almost 24/7 across the day. So essentially the grid has to keep functioning and supplying electricity at all times of the day, and batteries can help you do that. But batteries are also used in electric vehicles, and as the cost of battery technology comes down, electric vehicles also become much more cost competitive. So in the last decade or so, 90% cost reduction in batteries as well. Again, great news for the industry. In terms of the capacity of the financial markets, 2020 was a record year for renewable energy and battery storage companies to raise capital. They raised almost $20 billion from the public market last year. So again, phenomenal success, and perhaps these companies will raise more capital going forward. But that's a small proportion of how much money is being deployed in these technologies and sectors. So actually, last year, almost $500 billion of capital was invested either in the form of asset finance or private equity in sectors like renewable energy, electric vehicles, energy storage, and newer upcoming technologies like hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. So again, a record year in 2020 in terms of capital deployment in the sector. There is a wider umbrella apart from clean energy, which also people are watching now in the fight against climate change, and that's the wider definition of ESG, environmental, social, and governance related funds. And again, 2020 was a record year in terms of ESG exchange traded funds to raise capital in the global markets. Almost $5 billion were raised or inflow happened in these funds every single month last year. So again, we are starting to see some success in terms of financial markets supporting efforts against climate change. And in the debt markets as well, you're starting to see significant scale up of sustainable finance or sustainable debt. So last year, we estimate that almost $730 billion of sustainable debt, either in the forms of bonds or in the forms of loans, particularly project-related loans, were issued last year. So again, a record year. So overall, great news, but you also have to remember that financial markets don't really, back a technology or a sector or a basket of sectors. purely based on the fight against climate change. They also have to see financial returns, and essentially green bonds last year overperformed other generic bond markets a fair bit, and so that's again a good indicator of the success of some of these sectors in terms of returning capital back to the shareholders and to the debt providers. So this is all good news, but let's do a reality check. Where are we in the power sector today, right? Almost 60% or so of power generation capacity today, and I'm talking about capacity, is from fossil fuels, from coal and natural gas. Only around 20-25% of power generation capacity is in new clean energy technologies like solar and wind. And if you translate that capacity number into actual electrons delivered to you and me, actual power generated, then numbers for solar and wind go down to almost 9% or 10%, right? So solar and wind are still a very small proportion of actual electricity generated around the world. So we have come a long way. Technology has become cheaper, but we are nowhere close to 100% clean energy or clean electricity in the power sector. So that's the problem we have. Let's focus on another sector of the economy. That's the transport sector. And I'm sure many of you have heard the buzz around electric vehicles, right? My team estimates that last year, more than 2.5 million light duty commercial vehicle and passenger cars were sold around the world, China and Europe being the major markets. And 2020 was an interesting year because while the year-on-year sales for internal combustion engine vehicles declined last year, actually the sales of electric vehicles grew up significantly in many markets. Now, this is partly also supported by policy intervention and consumer incentives. And we have some of these in India these days as well. But last year was pretty interesting because I think for the first time in certain markets, you had electric vehicle sales actually growing year on year and internal combustion engine vehicle sales declining year on year. One of the other things you need to back up the sales or growth of electric vehicles is charging infrastructure. If you sell electric vehicles, you have to make sure the public has access to charging infrastructure in one shape or form. Some people can charge at their home, but many people can't. So you really need public charging infrastructure. And again, 2020 was a watermark year because we had more than 1 million public charging stations or connection points around the world that are now in operation, right? So we are seeing significant growth and momentum there as well. Batteries are also getting more efficient. Few years ago, I would remember people talking about electric vehicles and saying, on a single charge, it's not going to go more than 50, 100 kilometers. I'll have to charge daily. It's a problem. Now cars are being sold in many places around the world where range on one single charge is 200 to 400 kilometers. So batteries of the same size are getting more efficient as chemistry improves and as energy density of the batteries improves. So that's again pretty good news. But again, a reality check. Only 4% of all the cars sold in the world last year were electric. The share looks better for electric vehicles when you look at other segments like buses and 2 and 3 wheelers. But when it comes to passenger cars and kind of light duty vehicles and trucks, the share of electric vehicles in new sales every year is still pretty modest, right? So again, we are starting to see some good success, initial success, but we are a long way away from decarbonizing the transport sector. In India, actually, the share of electric vehicles sold in the car market is less than 0.5% right now. We hope that it's going to go to almost 2% by 2025. But again, I'm talking about numbers which are single digit percentages in terms of annual vehicle sales. So again, we have a long, long way to go to decarbonize India's transport sector. Let's talk about another sector of the economy, which is industrial economy, right? Sectors like steel, cement, chemicals, aluminum. All of these sectors essentially need heat, right? And many of these sectors need high temperature heat. Now, when you need to generate high temperature heat, most of the times the solution to do that is essentially fossil fuels, right? And there are certain sectors like aluminum where you have electric arc furnaces kind of technology where you can use electricity. If you can use electricity, you can probably use clean electricity. That's an option. But right now, most of these sectors use, a lot of heat production comes essentially from fossil fuels. So that's a challenge in itself. As I said, one of the options to decarbonize industrial sector is to move from using molecules generated from fossil fuels to use electricity, hopefully generated by solar and wind technologies. But the challenge is that that shift is going to take some time because almost 78 to 80% of all the final energy consumed in industrial sectors comes from molecules, not from electrons. So you have to change processes significantly to use more electricity. The other option is to use cleaner electrons, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Another way of trying to increase the efficiency of the industrial sectors is basically reducing waste, reducing downtime, optimizing fuel consumption. And we are starting to see significant momentum in companies raising money for industrial IoT solutions, right? So I'm sure some of you have heard words like digital twin, right? Or the use of artificial intelligence in industrial economy. Those things are gaining traction and will hopefully be also useful in the fight against climate change and decarbonizing the industrial sector. But one concept is also making inroads, which is a concept of circular economy. Now, essentially, the concept of circular economy says that you make a certain product using clean energy and sustainable materials. You try and design it in a way that its life is as long as possible, and servicing can enhance its life even further. You recover as much as possible of the end of life product, and because it was perhaps made by sustainable material, it is biodegradable. But you can also use some of this end of life product into recycling the key ingredients, and then you can use the recycled key ingredients back in making the newer product. So circular economy is gaining as an issue, and some good examples include things like recycling of lithium ion batteries, where people are trying to essentially strip away the core metals used in lithium ion batteries and reuse them in making newer batteries, right? So that concept is interesting. COVID definitely impacted investments in the circular economy part of the equation, but we are starting to see some rebound, and those investments are not dead yet, right? So lockdown essentially created a lot of skepticism on where consumer demand will be for various products and services, and hence circular economy investment tanked, but they're coming back up again. So we're making some progress, right? Which is the good news. Now, that progress is not enough, as I mentioned, right? So the question is, some of these cost competitive technologies that I mentioned to you, how far can they take us, right? In terms of trying to completely decarbonize the economy, right? And in the power sector, our assessment is that solar and wind are already cheapest technologies. They can get even cheaper in the future. And almost 56% of electricity generated in 2050 should come from these clean energy technologies or zero emissions technologies. If you add other technologies like hydro and nuclear, you're talking about a global power system which is 3/4 decarbonized, right? You'll still have almost 24-25% of fossil fuel power generation, but you've gotten a pretty long way. But to get there is no small feat, right? You need almost $15 trillion of new capital to be deployed, new investment to happen just in the power generation sector. You need another $14 trillion of money to be invested globally in the power transmission and distribution sector to have a grid which is resilient to take technologies like solar and wind, which don't generate electricity 24/7 and 365 days in the year. The good news is that a lot of these investment will happen in our part of the world, in your part of the world, in Asia Pacific. In China, India, Southeast Asia are the key regions around the world which will draw in a lot of these investments, particularly in clean energy technologies and energy storage. Battery technology, we think, will get cheaper even further. So like solar, it has an experience curve. We think prices for battery technology are going down by almost 19% for every doubling of capacity in the market. It's a very new industry in itself. So doubling will happen in terms of volumes much faster right now. And we think, battery packs will sell essentially at less than $100 a kilowatt hour in the next 4 to 5 years, which is a very important number, because when battery packs can sell at below $100 a kilowatt hour, many places around the world, you see electric cars becoming cheaper to purchase for end consumers compared to petrol or diesel cars. And similarly, you can use batteries quite cost effectively in the power sector to dispatch electricity for 3 to 4 hours a day. So batteries getting cheaper is going to impact both the power sector and the transport sector. They will impact the transport sector so much so that we believe that in 2040, almost 2/3 of all vehicle sold, or all cars and light duty vehicles sold around the world will be electric. And the leading markets in terms of new electric vehicle sales will be China and Europe. US will follow as well. But there are certain markets which will take a few years to actually hit the inflection points required to have a significant growth in the sales of electric vehicles. India is one such market where we expect that till 2025, particularly in the car set market, you will see pretty slow action perhaps in terms of electric vehicle sales. But as batteries get cheaper, somewhere around 2025, you'll hit an inflection point, and from there you'll see exponential growth in terms of electric vehicle sales in India as well, as a proportion of overall vehicle sales. So that's the good news in terms of the transport sector. But as you saw, we are still going to like 2/3 electric vehicle sales. And remember, I was talking about electric vehicle sales every year. I was not talking about the overall fleet, because you still have petrol or diesel cars which are around and will run for another, let's say, 10, 15 years, right? The other sector of the economy, the industrial sector, demand for materials like steel, cement is continuing to grow. And India and Southeast Asia are actually two regions in the world where we'll see significant growth and demand for materials like steel and cement. Now, as I mentioned to you, industrial sector is pretty hard to decarbonize. So if you purely think about economics, if you say that every factory will use the cheapest alternative possible to generate heat, generate electricity, you will still have a lot of coal and gas and oil in the system in the industrial economy, right? So the tough challenge is essentially to try and decarbonize the industrial economy. And there are few solutions that are possible, but they're not cost competitive yet. And they're not going to be that cost competitive in our assessment in 2030, 2040. So we really have a tough fight on our hands for the industrial economy in particular. So that's essentially where we will head to in terms of using the most competitive technology. Things like solar, wind, batteries, all of those things are getting cheaper. They can help a lot. They can get us probably halfway there, 2/3 there in terms of, decarbonizing certain sectors, but we are not going to be very close to where the world needs to be. And I say this because after doing all the modeling based on the most economic options around the world, what we arrived at in terms of emissions was the fact that the good news is that as humanity, we can essentially achieve peak annual emissions almost now, right? So that's probably happened or going to happen in the next couple of years. But you can see that emissions are actually declining very slowly thereafter. So annual emissions peak and decline very, very slowly thereafter. Now, some people may consider this as good news, but actually, if you look at what the scientists were telling us, if you want to reduce emissions or essentially maintain temperatures in the 1.75 to 2 degree warming range compared to pre-industrial levels, you need to reduce annual emissions very, very quickly. And the key target many scientists are watching for and is laid out in the Paris agreement is that the world needs to aim for 1.5 degrees of warming, right? We can't really go back to pre-industrial levels of temperature. We will have to live with some rise of global temperature, and that's not going to be good, but that's still, manageable. But to get to that 1.5 degree, this red line here is showing you that we need an exponential decline in emissions. So technology, cost competitive technology can take us somewhere, but it's not going to take us to where we need to go, right? So what levers can we pull? The first one is, policy. And even in the transport sector, you're seeing here that the dashed lines are showing you where we need to be to meet net zero targets, as various people in the industry tell you. The solid lines are essentially where economics takes you. So some sectors of the transport sector, we are going to be okay, like, buses, two-wheelers, we can make progress. Heavy trucks, heavy duty transport, we are not there, right? Because, heavy trucks essentially need very energy dense fuel, right? And batteries are not really that energy dense at the moment. So that's one of the problems we have. Even cars, we need to make significant progress. So one of the levers you can pull is policy. And some of you might have observed that certain countries around the world are starting to take targets saying they will reach net zero emissions in their economies by 2050 or 2060. Back in January 2020, only 34% of global emissions was coming from countries which had some kind of target or ambition. Today, almost 60% of global emissions are happening in countries which have some form of net zero target. India doesn't. It's a point of debate in the upcoming climate change negotiations happening later in the year. So it will be very interesting to see what India's stand on this particular issue is. But there are technologies which can help today, although they're at a smaller scale right now. So carbon capture and storage is a technology which has been touted as a technology which can help capture the emissions from particularly the industrial sector without the need to change the processes in the industrial sector. So you can make cement the way you're making it right now if you can use carbon capture and storage. You can make steel the way you are making it right now using met coke. If you can capture the emissions and store the CO2 somewhere or reuse the CO2. But the challenge is US, which is a leader in carbon capture and storage technology, even that country is starting to see a that are available to capture the CO2, right? Because the technology is expensive. So we need very significant scale up of investments. There's another form of option available, which is hydrogen. I don't know if some of you have noticed that certain Indian companies are becoming very active, making announcement that they want to produce clean hydrogen at $1 a kg kind of cost, right? Hydrogen is interesting because if you can have a clean molecule, you don't need to really change the processes used in the industry. You can fly the planes the same way you do. With a different fuel, obviously, you'll have to reconfigure some of the engine mechanisms in the plane to use hydrogen rather than jet fuel. But hydrogen by and large is a molecule, and if you can generate a clean molecule, then you can essentially substitute it in various industries right now. The challenge, though, is hydrogen. Production is still a small industry. And if you want to produce hydrogen at costs which are competitive to other options like natural gas, you have to invest a significant amount of capital to do so. So this is one of the technological options that a lot of oil and gas companies, a lot of power utilities, a lot of transport companies are talking about today, car manufacturers. If we can really generate hydrogen at relatively cheap cost, then perhaps it can become one of the solutions. So those are essentially the solutions. As I said to you, we made some progress in the fight against climate change. We are nowhere close to kind of getting to 100% win. Even if we reduce emissions to zero today, it will take years and years and years for the world to normalize in some sense. But we need to make a start, and we have. But we need to accelerate from where we are today. I'll leave you with this picture. This is a picture of Houston in 2017, Hurricane Harvey. This is the city I live in today, and I just moved into the city this year. And when I was trying to get a house in Houston, one of the major things I had to assess was whether the house comes in a flooding zone or not. That's one of the decisions I had to make to find a place to live. Because Houston, by and large, has been known as a city which faces a lot of hurricanes, but the intensity of those hurricanes is increasing. And Hurricane Harvey was 1 in 1,000 event, right? So 1 in 1,000 chance of this happening in a single year. But you are starting to see more of these 1 in 100, 1 in a 500 chance hurricanes happening in the city on an increasing basis. So our task is cut out. I hope I don't see this ever again. I don't face this kind of a situation in at least my stay in Houston. But I hope in all the sectors of the economy you go and work at, you will try and do your bit to kind of take us to a win in the fight against climate change. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, sir. We'll keep the floor open to questions now. Guys, you can please raise your hand to ask the questions. The first question we have is from Vaibhav.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this insightful session. So my question is, like, while the companies and the communities have been adapting to reduce the climate risk, at the same time, the pace and the scale of adaptation is very important to avoid the physical climate risk. Right. So adaptation is likely to entail rising costs as well as tough choices that may include whether to invest in hardening or relocate people and assets. Right. So what are your thoughts on the same?
So, Vaibhav, that's a great question. And in fact, I don't know if some of you have noticed, but climate risk and physical climate risk is becoming a measurement of physical climate risk, and then ensuring assets and communities against that is becoming an industry in itself. It's a huge buzzword in capital markets today. I think we're really at an early stage of essentially our ability to measure climate risk, right? As I said to you in 2017, when the Hurricane Harvey happened in Houston, a lot of people were taken by surprise, even in a city where hurricanes and storms are pretty normal, right? There's a season of the year where people expect heavy rains, right? But the quantum that happened that year was highly unexpected. Nobody had ever seen that in their lives, right? So really, really early days, and I'm starting. The good news is we are starting to see that companies are being forced either by financial regulators or their industry regulators to start documenting the ability of their assets to actually meet physical climate risk stress, right? So investors are demanding action. But again, the definitions are not very standard right now. Bloomberg is part of actually an effort to standardize some of this definition, but really early days. So we need standard definition, standard quantifiable measures. And once you get there, then you can probably have, the insurance industry, the financial markets, then take, prudent decisions. Early days, but, progress is slow and steady.
Thank you, sir.
Next, I'll invite Baiduriya to ask this question.
Hello, sir. Thank you for a very insightful session. So, my question was regarding the solar power. Like, I saw it is one of the most ubiquitous sources of energy, and it is also one of the cheapest. However, when I look at the usage statistics, like maybe in companies like Tesla or something, a very small portion of their energy generation is via solar. So, is there any specific reasons for that? Are there any constraints that we don't yet know which is stopping the leapfrog potential of solar power?
So that's a great question as well. And essentially, I like solar as a technology because of its modularity. So it has technical modularity, right? So I've got a very small solar panel now, actually, which I need to fix tomorrow at my house, which will run my kind of security camera, right? So it can be this small, or it could be thousands and thousands of megawatt and acres of land that you can use to, produce a lot of clean electricity. So the modularity of the technology is very useful, which also gives it another edge, which is financial modularity, right? So not everybody has, a lot of money to, install a 500 megawatt solar project or 1,000 megawatt solar project, but smaller communities can do smaller size projects, and, they can be various funding mechanisms. So that's one of the beauties of solar. But it is a technology which doesn't produce electricity 24/7, right? When sun is not shining, it won't really produce electricity. So that's one of the challenges. So if you are a factory which needs 24/7 power, for example, you need something else apart from solar to provide the electricity in times when sun isn't shining. And that's why I talked about batteries, because batteries can become that enabling mechanism, at least for 3 to 4 hours a day to start with in the next few years. They can charge with the solar panels or from the power grid and dispatch electricity. As I said to you, I think our estimate is, world will probably have 25-30% of its electricity being generated by solar in 2050. So technology has made progress, but there is a long way to go. We're still at really kind of the early stages of solar technology taking off. Some people in the industry have been around, like I've been around in this industry for a decade and a half or more. It feels like, a lot has been done, but actually when you look at the forecast, a lot more needs to be done. We're just at the first set of inflection points for exponential growth.
Thank you, sir.
The next question is from Vani. Vani, please go ahead.
Good morning, sir. So my question is, environmental, social, and governance is a criteria that has been an increasing interest to the companies right now. So what do you see as the major barriers to successful investment?
That's a great question. ESG has been touted as, in the financial markets, one of the key thematics that everybody is looking at. There are two major themes in my mind in financial markets today. One is inflation and the other is ESG. And as I showed in my presentation, a lot of money is flowing into ESG related ETFs, ESG related funds. The challenge we have is there is a huge number of measurement mechanisms for each of the factors of ESG, right? So environmental, social, and governance, there are various companies which have various parameters they want to track. And again, there's a lack of standardized definitions, right? So that's one of the challenges again for the industry now. And in fact, what has happened recently is there's so much money that has come in that some of these definitions are getting heavy scrutiny, because you will sometimes read news in the newspapers, perhaps, that a coal mining company, for example, has scored very heavily on ESG. How can that happen, right? It's a coal mining company. Or a tobacco company is doing really well on ESG scores, right? How can that happen, right? Because it doesn't really meet the social norms, right? So that kind of stuff is happening, but I think it's a very healthy debate and happening at the right point of time, because again, as I said across my presentation on all these questions, we are really at the starting point in the fight on climate change. So it's good to have these conversations now and sort out and iron out these definitions, and then the capital markets will actually follow and do their bits.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on, we have next question from Shweta.
Thank you, sir, for the session. I had a question, like companies like L'Oreal are going organic with their product offerings, and ESG has become a critical component of strategy and decision making. So what do you think in context of Indian companies? Are they incorporating enough? Like, are they doing enough in terms of ESGs when it comes to strategy?
That's a good question, a complex one. I think in some sectors, you're probably seeing more momentum. I wouldn't name companies here, but I see some progress being made in the energy sector, for example, where companies are saying, we will stop investing in thermal power generation, we'll only invest in clean power technologies. The investors are forcing them to go there as well, by and large, and the technology cost is forcing them to make that shift as well. In certain other sectors, you are also making progress. Even the tech industry in India, you see many of them have carbon neutrality targets today. They're using a lot of clean electricity in their office and in their business operations. They've always been pretty decent in terms of the social and governance aspect of the ESG. They're doing more on environmental side. I think where we lag is essentially the industrial economy, as I said. And that's where I think the fight is really, really massive. In power sector, India has actually become a shining example of what a free and open market mechanism can do to reduce costs, right? India, and my team has done some work, particularly in the Indian market, And we have said that various other developing economies can actually look at the example of India and adapt the example of India on how free and fair auctions can be done to reduce cost of clean energy. So in that sector, we're doing well, but in industrial sector, we have a problem because um, we want the cheapest material possible. If you want the cheapest material possible, you have to use the cheapest fuel source. That's going to all add up at some point of time. So we're making some slow and steady progress, but a lot more needs to be done in that sector.
Thank you, sir.
The next question we have from Piyush Jain.
Good morning, sir. Sir, my question is, like, it is good to see that increasing awareness of EVs and decreasing prices of batteries, but these are mostly powered by the traditional carbon sources only. So can you please share that is it required for us to upgrade the power sources than its usage in respect of that?
Great question, Piyush, and maybe offline I can share with you a study that my team had done around the world. You're absolutely right that actually how green the current electricity grid is dictates how much CO2 emissions will an electric vehicle have, right? So there are countries which have a lot of nuclear power generation, a lot of hydropower generation. I can tell you about countries like Brazil or France, where the grid is pretty clean in terms of CO2 emissions. So you plug in an EV, you are charging, the EV from a clean grid, and so emissions are much lower compared to a traditional, petrol or diesel car. But our assessment shows that even today, even in countries like China, which have a significant proportion of coal power generation, for example, using an EV from a CO2 emissions perspective is better than using a petrol or diesel car. Now, remember the fact that apart from CO2 emissions, internal combustion engine vehicles also have SOx, NOx, particulate matter emissions, right? Which by and large are blamed for the pollution in cities, right? So EVs also take that away from the equation to an extent, right? At least, right? So by and large, I think EVs are better. And as I said, the electricity grid will also keep on continuing to get cleaner as solar and wind power generation technologies become economical, batteries become cheaper. And so in the next 20-30 years, I think there's going to be no question that in most countries around the world, which matter in terms of volume and size for the market, EVs are much better option to use.
Thank you.
Next, we have Karupaya with this question.
Yeah. Hello, sir. So my question was about, so we see the data centers to be consuming a lot of electricity. So like at most 2% of the world's electricity is consumed by data centers, and they also contribute to a significant amount of CO2 emissions. So, in the upcoming years, we see the rapid increase of data centers. Obviously, there is going to be the increase. Many data centers are converting their, they are meeting out their energy demands through solar panels installed in acres. But would they be able to again reduce their carbon emissions in the upcoming year? So, what is your take on it, sir?
Great question as well. Again, my team has done some work around this. Interestingly, tech companies, as I mentioned earlier, just in the Indian context, have been some of the leaders in terms of trying to adapt clean energy solutions, right? Globally as well, called FANGs in the US market, right? Companies like Facebook, Apple, Google and others. They have been by and large leaders in terms of trying to take a carbon neutrality pledge and use clean electricity. So most of the companies now actually, when they're setting up a new data center, have a plan to power that data center by clean electricity. And that's not only in their home country, like when I think some of these big US tech companies are setting up operations in countries like Singapore or Southeast Asia or India, they have a plan to do this around the world, not only in their home country. So that's the good news. Now, to your specific question on how this can be done technically, there are two options, right? One is to have your own, solar or wind power project relatively close to the site of the data center. And sometimes it's possible, but I think as you're pointing out, sometimes it isn't, right? Because there's not enough land next to the data center, for example. But that's where regulation and policy comes in. Now, if the power regulators in that state or in that province allow clean electricity to be given to the companies via the transmission system, then these companies will go ahead and buy clean electricity from, let's say, a solar project 200 kilometers away. And then it's the job of the grid transmission companies to actually have that electricity flow to the site in some sense. So those options are also possible. Sometimes the companies also have the option to buy renewable energy certificates, as they're called. So they consume electricity from the grid, whatever shape and form it is coming, but they buy a certificate from somebody else who's generating clean electricity in a different place in the country, and that essentially helps that project to be built to generate and deliver clean electricity to somebody else. So there are various mechanisms possible, but tech companies by and large have been at the forefront of doing this.
Next, we have Sudipto's question.
Yeah, sir. Good morning, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session. And as you are saying that these big tech companies are doing a lot in terms of marketing, that they are going carbon neutral and all. But on the other hand, these companies are doing AI research where they will make the process of finding new underground oil reserves very efficient, and they are finding AI technology regarding that. So that will bring the oil prices down, and the electric technology will be adoption of electric technology will be delayed. So what's your take on that? One hand, they are promoting green energy, and on one hand, they are doing this kind of research. So
Dipta, I would say, again, good question. And there's been a little bit of a philosophical debate in some tech companies. Again, I wouldn't name the companies here, but I think if you read the press, you would realize that in certain companies, actually employees had written to their management saying, we shouldn't use technologies like AI and machine learning to help sectors which are essentially, polluting sectors. So there's been that debate, at least in some companies. It's very hard to say how many companies will actually fully back out of, supporting their clients in the, let's say, the oil and gas or the coal industry, right? Only time will tell. But what is also happening is, from the investor side, these companies are facing a lot more pressure. So today, it's very, very difficult to, go and have an offshore oil project anywhere in the world unless, without facing significant investor scrutiny. It's very difficult to set up a LNG export or natural gas export project in the US and sell that, gas to India, for example, without significant investor scrutiny. So at least from capital market perspective, things are getting very tightened. From a technology deployment perspective, I think technology firms, to be honest with you, will have a hard time giving up their clients in these sectors completely.
okay, sir. Thank you for your insight.
So due to paucity of time, I'll take one last question from Anshul. Anshul, please go ahead with the question.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Sir, my question is, like a country like India, which faces various geographic and resources constraints, how will it be possible to make a smooth transition towards the adoption of electric vehicles on a large scale?
Sanchal, great question again. If you actually remember the chart I showed to you, which is where we are in terms of annual electric vehicle sales in different categories of the transport sector, you would have noticed that I mentioned that actually in the 2 and 3 wheeler market globally, more than half of the 2 and 3 wheelers sold around the world are already electric. Now, large part of that is actually China. China is the biggest market for 2 and 3 wheelers, right? And most of the 2 and 3 wheelers sold in that market are by and large electric. Largely because a lot of battery manufacturing companies, their battery prices are cheaper. You also have government subsidies. You also have government bans on selling, petrol or diesel vehicles to an extent, particularly in the 2 and 3 wheeler segment. But But by and large, you're starting to see a lot of momentum. Municipal buses, you have a lot of momentum. Almost 30-40% of municipal buses sold in the world are electric now. So that gives me hope that in certain segments which actually matter a lot for India, particularly 2 and 3 wheeler segment, you might see rapid adoption. Where we have a problem is mid-segment cars, right? Because those cars are relatively inexpensive in India, right? I think we ran numbers a few years ago when we were doing the modeling for this. Actually, we do this every year now. And an average car in India is less than $10,000, right? Around $7,000 to $8,000. An average car in the US is around $30,000. So what happens is when the average car price in a market is, that low of $7,000, $8,000, making a car which with batteries, with good range and high performance is quite difficult at the moment. And that's why, if you remember the curves I showed for India, and I said, we will see momentum picking up in India in post 2025, because we still think, there are 4 or 5 years left, particularly in the car segment in India, for batteries to get cheap enough to make a dent in the car segment. 2 and 3 wheelers, I'm quite hopeful from the Indian context.
Okay, thank you for
answering. Thank you, sir. Sir, it was indeed a pleasure to have you with us here, and it was really an interesting session. So to proceed forward, I would request Professor Jothsna Rajan, our faculty coordinator for Prabandhan, to kindly take the stage and share a few words with us.
Thank you, Nilanjan. And good morning to our esteemed guest speakers, Mr. Sethia and Mr. Srivastava, Director of IIT Kanpur, Professor Karandikar, the Head of IME Department, Professor Phani, my colleagues and faculty members of IIT Kanpur, guests and participants at Prabandhan'21, and dear students. So it's a pleasure to speak here as the faculty coordinator of Prabandhan'21, and it is my role to express gratitude to all who made this event possible. On behalf of the Institute and the department, a big thank you to Mr. Sethia for sharing his perspectives on this important topic, the business of climate change, and for conveying the urgency of the problem and for discussing the current status and possible solutions to what is possibly the largest and most devastating crisis looming over the global economy and population. It was interesting to note that you mentioned an intersectoral approach as well, with an intersection of technology, policy, and management levers, reflecting the view suggested by Professor Karandikar. This seems to be the need of the hour, or even the need of the next few decades. Mr. Sethia, your talk was insightful, stark, and illuminating. Thank you for taking the time to share your views with all of us. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Mr. Srivastava for sharing his thoughts on entrepreneurship and his experience in the HR domain. As Mr. Srivastava already alluded to, his being here today is a reflection of the lasting relationship that his firm has with the IME Department and IIT Kanpur. He is also joining us later to speak about changing landscapes of hiring. Thank you, Mr. Srivastava, for your continued involvement with Prabandhan and for your presence here today. I would like to thank our director, Professor Abhay Karandikar. Professor Karandikar had to leave a little earlier, but he has been unfailing in his support for the event. And thank you, Professor Karandikar, for being here this morning, sharing his vision for the Institute and the department, and for inaugurating the 10th edition of Prabandhan. Thanks also to all my faculty colleagues at IME Department, especially the head of the department, Professor Phani, who has always been an energetic leader and a source of indefatigable patience and support. Professor Phani, thank you for your kind words today, and this event would have been less without your assistance. And ladies and gentlemen, an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels started rolling many weeks ago. It required planning and a view for details. Prabandhan'21 has been fortunate enough to be put together by a team of motivated and dedicated MBA students who know their jobs and are results oriented. As Prabandhan moved online last year, our students adapted and learned rapidly and effectively in the changing circumstances and deserve all the credit. I cannot thank everyone enough for their involvement and their willingness to take on the tasks beyond their comfort zones. Once again, I want to state that we are most grateful to our speakers today. It has been a pleasure to have you, and we welcome all of our participants to Prabandhan'21. Thank you for being here. I hope you will have a great time. As Professor Phani mentioned earlier, we have an exciting set of events webinars and panel discussions planned over the weekend. Our first event begins today at 11 a.m. Welcome all of you to join these events and have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words there. So Prabandhan itself being built on grounds of diversified learning, we couldn't have asked more for a better start and learning about the various aspects here. Also, sir, as a token of gratitude, we have planted a tree on your behalf on the grounds of Panna Tiger Reserve, the certificate of which will be shared over email. Thank you once again for your presence and taking out time and adjusting over time zones for this event. With this, I formally conclude today's session, and this only marks the beginning of the exciting 3 days to follow. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.